Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Luna breathed in tiny gasps as the automobile rushed through Los Angeles' neon-lit streets. The city's pulse, which is typically lively and exhilarating, felt like a mocking of her own pounding heart. Finn grabbed the steering wheel, his knuckles white and his jaw set in a hard line. Lee sat next him, arms crossed, her demeanor determined, but her eyes revealed a flash of discomfort. Luna, hunched in the back seat, held her tummy, not out of pain, but out of a desperate want to protect the life growing inside her. The weight of their decision weighed against her chest, heavier than the entire universe. It had begun as a typical day, or as normal as days could be in the complex web of relationships that comprise the Forrester family and their circle. Luna, just 21, had been figuring out her position among them, her heart caught up in a maelstrom of love, devotion, and secrets. She'd known about the pregnancy for weeks, but she wasn't sure how to tell a world that appeared to thrive on criticism. The father, a fleeting link from a night she scarcely recalled, was no longer in the picture. But the baby, her baby, was real, a flutter of optimism she hadn't anticipated feeling so strongly. She hadn't intended to tell anyone yet, but secrets in this world have a way of unraveling. Lee, Finn's mother, and a lady whose presence elicited equal parts respect and horror, had overheard Luna's whispered phone call to her doctor. The confrontation was quick and harsh. Lee's voice was as sharp as a sword, cutting through Luna's defenses. "You're not prepared for this. You're too young and unstable. This would wreck your life." Luna protested, her words stuttering over tears, but Lee's determination was unwavering. Finn, trapped between his mother's authority and his own complex affections for Luna, had stood silently, a betrayal in and of itself. The air inside the automobile was dense with unspoken words. Luna's thoughts raced, recalling the moment Lee announced they were taking her to the hospital. "It's for your own good," Lee continued, her tone leaving no space for disagreement. Finn nodded, averting Luna's gaze as if gazing at her would break his resolve. Luna longed to scream, demanding that they stop the car and allow her out into the night, where she could disappear with her baby and start over. However, her voice felt stifled, crushed by the weight of their expectations. The hospital loomed ahead, its stark white lights shining through the darkness. Luna's hands trembled as she placed them harder against her tummy, as if she could protect her baby from what was to come. She remembered her mother, Poppy, who had always been a free spirit, too wild for the confines of the Forrester Society. Poppy would have battled for her and told her to run. But Poppy was not present, and Luna felt the crushing loneliness of standing alone against two people she had once trusted. Inside the hospital, the sterile odor of antiseptic hit her like a wave. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on Finn's face as he led her through the sliding doors. Lee marched ahead, her heels clicking purposefully, and was already speaking quietly to a nurse. Luna's legs felt like lead, each step bringing her closer to the moment she couldn't bear to confront. She wanted to tell them she had changed her mind and would figure out a way to make it work, but the words wouldn't come. Fear and shame curled around her, becoming tighter with each passing second. The nurse brought them to a small room, where a doctor stood with a clipboard and a trained grin. Luna sat on the edge of the examination table, her hands still pressed to her stomach, and her gaze locked on the floor. The doctor spoke carefully to describe the operation, but his words became a murmur in her ears. She heard fragments, safe, quick, best for everyone. But none of it felt genuine. She wanted to inquire about her kid, about the faint but steady heartbeat she had heard at her previous appointment, like a promise. But Lee's presence in the corner of the room, arms crossed and eyes fixed, quieted her. Finn stood near the door, shoulders slumped, hands buried in his pockets. Luna studied his face for a resemblance of the man she'd once thought cared about her, the one who'd laughed with her at the beach and held her hand when she was terrified. But Finn was gone, replaced by someone who could not meet her gaze. "Finn," she said softly, her voice breaking. He flinched and did not look up. The stillness between them spoke louder than any words. Luna's hand shook as she took the pen from the doctor and signed the consent form. The lines on the paper blurred as she peered at it through tears. They stated she had a choice, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a sentence, delivered by those who professed to know what was best for her. She remembered her baby, the life she had imagined, tiny hands, sweet coos, a future she could create despite the chaos around her. But that future was slipping away under the weight of their aspirations. She did not sign the paperwork. Instead, she let it fall to the ground, her hands curled into fists. "I can't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but forceful enough to make Lee's head jerk up. "I won't." Lee's gaze sharpened, her voice low and controlled. "Luna, do not be silly. You're not prepared for this. You'll thank us later." "No," Luna shouted loudly, shocking herself. "You don't get to make this decision for me. This is my baby. My life." She stood, her legs shaky but her determination rising. She looked to Finn, hoping he'd say something to support her. But he stayed silent, his eyes fixated on the floor, and Luna realized she was truly alone. As Lee drew closer, the space seemed to shrink, with the walls closing in. Her voice rose. "You are making a mistake. You'll wreck everything, including your future and place here. Think about what you're doing." Luna shook her head, tears flowing down her cheeks but her voice remaining firm. "I'm thinking. For the first time, I'm thinking for myself." She turned to the doctor, who was taken aback by the abrupt change. "I am not doing this. I'm leaving." She pushed past Finn, who made no attempt to stop her, and went out of the room, her heart hammering but her stride steady. The hospital corridors stretched out before her indefinitely, yet each stride seemed like a reclaiming of her power, choice, and future. She had no idea where she was going or how she was going to get by, but she knew she couldn't let them take this away from her. Outside, the night air felt cold against her tear-stained cheeks. She wrapped her arms about herself, feeling a small flutter in her stomach as a reminder of the life she had chosen to preserve. The city hummed around her, indifferent but alive, and Luna felt able to breathe for the first time in hours. She didn't glance back as she walked away from the hospital, Finn, Lee, and the weight of their decisions. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was hers. And it was enough. The days after were a fog of survival. Luna found a little apartment on the outskirts of town, which she paid for with her remaining savings. It was cramped and noisy, but it was hers, a spot where she could think without being suffocated by others. She avoided the Forrester estate, a dazzling world of luxury and drama that had once sounded so appealing. That world had no place for her now, especially since she was choosing a route they didn't comprehend. She took a job at a cafe, where the coffee was strong and the customers were too busy to ask questions. Her shifts were lengthy, her feet ached, and the tips barely covered rent, but she took quiet delight in every dollar she made. It was legitimate work, and it was hers. She began to plan, investigate, and put together a life for herself and her baby. She discovered a free clinic, a support group for single mothers, and a community that did not judge her for her decisions. But the weight of what had transpired never really left her. When the city quieted and nighttime fell, she thought about Finn. She wondered if he regretted his silence, if he ever considered her, what may have been. She also thought about Lee, and the steely certainty in her eyes, as if she was saving Luna from herself. Luna didn't hate them, and she couldn't forgive them either. They had attempted to take something precious from her, and their betrayal stung deeper than words. Her mother, Poppy, reappeared one rainy afternoon, her hair wild and her eyes full of pride and concern. "You're stronger than I ever was," Poppy whispered, bringing Luna into a hug that smelled like patchouli and freedom. Poppy had nothing to offer in terms of money or stability, but she did have stories, laughter, and a strong conviction in Luna's ability to forge her own path. They talked for hours, planned, and dreamed of a future in which Luna's baby could grow up surrounded by love rather than criticism. Luna's belly swelled throughout the weeks and months, a gentle reminder of her decision. She furnished the little apartment with used furniture, a cot she acquired at a thrift store, and a mobile she constructed out of fabric scraps and string. It wasn't much, but it was sufficient. She began to visualize her child's face, their laughter, and how they would look at her with trust and amazement. Those thoughts sustained her through the long nights, times of doubt, and the dread that she might not be enough. Luna felt a strong, relentless kick one evening while sitting at the window, watching the city lights. She chuckled, tears welling up in her eyes, and rested her hand on her stomach. "We're going to be okay," she said quietly, and for the first time, she believed it. The world outside may maintain its drama, judgments, and expectations. She had her baby, her courage, and her decision. That was more than enough. The story of Luna's stance against Finn and Lee traveled silently, like a ripple in the tumultuous pool of the Forrester universe. Some called her foolish, others brave. Luna didn't care what they said. She was developing her life one little, resolute step at a time. Her baby would be born into a world she created, rather than one governed by the rules of others. And in that act of resistance, Luna discovered something unexpected: herself. Luna never dreamed that the individuals she trusted the most would be the ones to injure her in ways that words could never heal. For so long, she had relied on Finn and Lee, believing they were by her side, that family and love were the shields that protected the world from being too harsh. But that illusion was broken the moment their hands, steady, decisive, and frigid with certainty, removed her from the narrow circle of control she had created for herself. The night it happened resurfaced in her head, like broken glass grinding against her thoughts. She was already vulnerable, pulled between the weight of decisions she was unprepared to make. Finn had said he'd listen. Lee had pledged to protect her. But when the storm hit, when her voice trembled with the strength to speak what she needed, it was drowned out by their insistence, fear, and tidy plans for her life that left no place for her own. After that, the stillness was the cruelest thing. Luna went out of the hospital with her body intact but her spirit broken, as if some part of her had been stolen in a room with 2 bright lights and 2 quiet voices. She didn't cry at first. Shock may pass for strength, but later, alone in her room, she sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe. Every area of her apartment felt haunted. The couch where she had previously laughed with Finn, the kitchen where Lee had given her stories about survival and endurance, and the window where she had whispered dreams to the night. She could not eat. Food became ash in her mouth. Sleep eluded her, with each attempt devoured by dreams that caused her to wake up gasping and holding her chest, unable to distinguish between memory and nightmare. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed, with cars speeding down streets and neighbors greeting each other with easy ease. But Luna's world had halted. She felt as if she were confined in an invisible prison, screaming inaudibly. Days merged into weeks. She walked the city streets like a shadow, looking for something, anything, that would help her feel grounded again. Sometimes she would find herself in the park, staring at children running free, their joy ringing like small bells of a life she would never know. Other times, she would sit by the river, watching the current pull leaves downstream, envisioning herself being swept away to a world where anguish melted into the water and faded away. But the agony clung persistently. It wasn't all grief. It was betrayal that ate away at the marrow. How could she forgive Finn for silencing her? How could she look at Lee and not see the steel in her eyes from the night she refused to accept her plea? Luna composed letters she never sent, spilling her rage, sadness, and uncertainty onto paper, only to rip them apart. Words were not enough. Nothing was sufficient. She had moments when she feared she would vanish completely. One evening, while on a bridge, she leaned against the railing, wondering how easy it would be to slip away, allowing the ocean to obliterate her story. But something, a faint voice inside, defiant and fragile, kept her back. Perhaps it was a hazy remembrance of the girl she once was, the one who fantasized about painting walls with color, traveling beyond the boundaries of her pain, and writing her own conclusion. That voice became her thread, thin but strong. She clung to it, even as the darkness whispered louder. She slowly began to write again. Not the shattered letters intended for Finn or Lee, but stories, fragments of fiction containing shards of her heart. In her notepad, she imagined characters that fought back, screamed until the world listened, and rebuilt themselves from ashes. She didn't think she was strong enough to do the same thing yet, but her comments reflected who she might become one day. Her journal became her buddy. Each page depicted her grief, wrath, and longing. Some nights, she scribbled until dawn, filling the silence with ink until tiredness drove her to an unpleasant sleep. For the first time since that night, she caught a glimpse of something other than sadness. It was faint and nearly imperceptible, yet it was hers. One afternoon, she went by a small community center with a banner promoting an art therapy session. She halted at the entrance, her chest clenching and her instinct telling her to turn back. But that voice, the same one that had stopped her from the water, urged her to go inside. The room smelled faintly of paint and coffee. Strangers sat around a table covered in brushes and clay, their expressions conveying stories of loss and hope. Nobody asked her to explain. Nobody told her how she should feel. She picked up a brush and started painting. Her strokes began as rough, chaotic swirls of black and red, the hues of her suppressed wrath. However, as weeks went, the canvases altered. Blues and greens flowed in, delicate yet authentic. She learned that healing wasn't about removing grief, but about transforming it into something new, something symbolic of survival. The betrayal never ended. She couldn't change Finn's quiet or Lee's chilly conviction. They attempted to contact her on occasion, but texts and phone calls went unanswered. Part of her yearned for the family she had once believed in, but another part, one that had grown stronger, understood she couldn't go back to the people who had stolen her voice. Months turned into years. Luna relocated to a smaller apartment that was filled with plants and sunlight. Her walls were adorned with her paintings, each one a testimony to the tempest she had weathered. She still bore invisible yet heavy scars, yet they served as proof of survival rather than humiliation. Standing by her window one evening, she watched the sunset paint the city in gold. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, she could breathe without the weight crushing her chest. She realized she would never be the same girl she had been before that night. She had been broken in ways that could never be totally repaired. But she was still present, still breathing, still writing, still painting. And in the tranquil glimmer of evening, Luna whispered to herself the words she had long desired to hear. You are not weak. You are not voiceless. You're still you. Her story no longer consisted of quiet. It was a story about overcoming adversity, creating beauty out of ashes, and finding a fragile calm amid the ruins. The anguish lasted, but so did her. And it was enough.